can hardly talk about a church experience without talking about praise and worship. I mean, it's something that we can't even really imagine a church service taking place without music, right? You know, one of the questions that you are always going to get whenever you start talking to somebody about your church is typically about praise and worship. You know, what's the experience like? Is it contemporary? Is it traditional? Do you have a band, or do you just have a guy with a guitar, or do you have an organ or a piano or whatever it is? People are very wrapped up in the praise and worship, and it's kind of understandable from a human perspective, because the reality is that that's kind of like the outward expression of how a lot of us will interface with different aspects of our faith. I mean, if it was just about listening to some guy run his mouth about the Bible, you could do that anywhere. You could sit here and do that from home. You could listen to podcasts and look at videos on YouTube and whatnot. So praise and worship becomes very, very important to us. But I think one of the things that churches have to ask themselves is, are they really getting the right thing out of praise and worship? I mean, what is worship actually intended to do? You're going to read a couple of different verses in the Bible that I think really dig into this. The first thing you're going to read is something that actually goes into what Jesus ends up seeing and experiencing as he goes into the city of Jerusalem. But there's this phrase that I want you to cue in on, and you'll have some discussion questions about it, where Christ basically says, if I told everybody around me to be quiet, then even the stones would cry out in worship. There's this idea that Jesus is bringing up that we see echoed time and time again throughout the Old Testament, which is that all of creation really exists to glorify God. And if all of creation exists to glorify God, then shouldn't we, as, you know, the centerpiece of God's creation, also focus on trying to worship God? It's a high calling. And in fact, it's so high that we end up seeing in other places in the Bible where God basically says, if you're going to go through the motions of worshiping me, but your heart's not really going to be into it, I wish you'd just stop. I think that's kind of shocking for a lot of people, because, you know, if you were to go into a church and say, you know, so much of what's going on in here seems like, you know, people are not taking things seriously, or they're not really, you know, trying to reach down deep and open their hearts into what's going on when they're worshiping, you know, usually you would get this very popular response from people where they would say, well, you know what, at least they're here. And I get the heart behind that, but the reality is that that's not what God says. God actually holds worship in this very, very high place of esteem, so high that he effectively builds all of creation for the explicit purpose of worshiping him. It's something that we actually get the opportunity to do, and it's something that, if done right, can actually touch us very, very deeply, and it can help move us through times that are very, very, very difficult. So take a moment and read a couple of these pieces of scripture, and when you do that, there's going to be a link to a YouTube video down there, or at least the title of it, and I want you to take a moment and watch this video for a second, and then we'll talk about it when we come back. Now, there was a reason why I wanted you to watch that video, and it's because, at least to me, it connects very deeply with the true meaning of worship and what it really means, and how it helps you to get through the highs and the lows that life are going to bring at you. So if you know me and you know Meredith, then you'll know that our story of trying to start a family didn't necessarily start incredibly easy. I mean, things kind of started moving along quickly, all right, but pretty soon after we got pregnant, you know, we went through that period where we're kind of keeping it to ourselves and everything. And then the day after my birthday, Meredith was crying in the hallway. And I'll never forget the sight of her just kind of, you know, crumpled and in a mess, you know, over the fact that we had just miscarried. And it was, without a doubt, the darkest and the hardest moment of either one of our lives. And I know that so many people have gone through so much worse than that, but for us, it was terrible. The way that I heard another pastor put it is, he said, it's hard to describe the pain of making room in your heart for a child that's never going to show up. And it was hard, and in that moment, it would have been so easy for us to just lash out at God and to question his plan and why he was letting this happen to us. But Instead, we started going a little bit different direction. We started kind of retreating into our Bible studies and our worship and our church life and all of that. And this song kept popping up. And I guess as I was listening to it, the reason why it meant so much to Meredith and I was because we just stopped and we thought about that idea that the universe exists so that God can be worshipped. Everything that we see and that we experience in this world is here so that we can see the greatness of God. And if the stars were made to worship, if everything around us was made to worship, whether it's orderly or chaotic, or whether it's peaceful, or whether it's loud and brash, if all those things are there to worship God, then shouldn't I? Even when I'm having a dark moment, even when I feel like I'm at my worst, shouldn't I still acknowledge that God is who God is? Because after all, when I'm at my weakest and I feel like nothing can bring me out of that dark period of my life, God can. He's still there, and He can take me out of whatever it is I find myself in. He can lift up my spirit, and that is something that is worthy of worshiping God, even when you are in the middle of that very, very hard point in life. This is something that I feel like we actually end up seeing in the book of Job. And in the book of Job, it's kind of funny because in a lot of ways it's kind of a hard book to read because of some things that are going on and the time period it was being written in and whatnot. There's a lot of context involved, but there's this one thing that I want you guys to read. And it's a little bit longer, but I think you get a lot out of it. What you're basically going to end up seeing in here is the fact that Job, in the middle of this horrible time of his life where all these terrible tragedies have befallen him, he ends up having this moment where he almost questions God and basically just says, I feel like God hasn't given me my opportunity to plead my case. Why are you letting this happen to me? And you see God basically just kind of coming down and saying, Job, this is who I am. I am God and you are not. And I think that right there is the key, is that when we are worshiping God, we are making that acknowledgement ourselves. We're acknowledging that He is God and that we are not. And while that might sound like something that in isolation, maybe it almost makes God sound arrogant or makes Him sound cocky, I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. When I think about all of the chaotic moments of my life, when I think about all of the flaws I have, when I think about all the different traps and snares that this world lay out there that I just kind of joyfully waltz into, I don't want to be responsible for my own salvation because I know I can't do it, but God can. He is God and I am not. And I can't think of a more joyful thought than that. I think what I like so much about that section of Job there that we're having you read from is that, God basically goes through and says, here's all these examples of how I'm God and you're not. And Job basically, puts his hands up and says, okay, I get it. I spoke out of turn. And God could have stopped right there, but he basically turns around and says, no, you're going to sit there and you're going to listen to all the things I have to say about how I'm God and how you're not. And I said, just a second ago that it can almost come across as God being cocky and arrogant, but the reality is that this is the plan that God had. This is the purpose that He had when He was creating everything in Genesis 1 and saying, I created this and it was good, and I created that and it was good. He was saying that all these things had a purpose, and their ultimate purpose were to be reflections of His creativity, to be reflections of His dominion over things, and is a reflection of His power, of His control, of the beauty that can come from God. It's a reflection of everything we see in Him, which is why it becomes so amazing when we consider the fact that we were created in God's own image. So in a very literal sense, we were created to worship God. We were created for this purpose. This is something that you end up seeing in Revelation when you see Jesus Christ coming back again and restoring His kingdom here on earth. When He sits here and He renews everything, He reconciles everything back to God, back to the Creator through His sacrifice, you can see a very clear picture of the fact that we get returned back to that role that we were originally intended for. We basically are returned to the state of just constantly being in worship to God and to who He is. So you're going to read about that here in a second. But I want you to think about just the crazy implications that has. That your purpose on earth, the thing that makes you meaningful, that gives you purpose, that makes you successful, it isn't all the things that the world wants to throw at you. It's not anything that somebody else wants to, put on top of you. It's the fact that you are here to worship God and to be a reflection of His greatness to others, so that your life actually serves as worship in action. When we talk about worship, it can be easy to boil this down to basically nothing more than just the music we enjoy. But it's really so much more than that. If worship is acknowledging that He's God and that we're not, you can do that in so many different ways. You can do that in how you interact with other people. You can do that in how you choose to talk, how you choose to react to life situations that occur, how you choose to love and forgive and show compassion. All of these things can exhibit a form of worship. And the music is something we have that's unique. It's something that is absolutely, critical to our worship experience because of how we emotionally and spiritually connect with it. But I don't want that to be something that distracts us from the fact that it's music, but it's also so much more. It's something that's deeper. It's something that's not just an emotional connection. It's something that is an actual relationship building connection that we have with God, to sit here and reaffirm inside of our hearts and inside of our minds who God truly is in our life and in what role we hold Him up. If we truly are holding God up in that role where He is God and we are not, then that should fundamentally change how we approach all aspects of our life. And when we allow ourselves to actually go that direction, to make the decision that maybe is not intuitive to the world around us, to do the thing that is hard because it would be so much easier to just do what the rest of society expects. When we are willing to do those unconventional things, we are choosing to acknowledge who God is in our hearts and the fact that He is God and that we are not. And in that, God is worshiped in the action. So I encourage you, as you sit here and you go throughout the following week, to think about your worship. And when I say your worship, I don't just mean the music. I mean the music, I mean your actions, I mean how you choose to love and forgive, how you choose to be charitable to other individuals. All of these different things are opportunities for you to worship the God who created you for a specific purpose, and that is to be a reflection of not your nature, not the pastor's nature, not the nature of any kind of organization or community, but to be a reflection of a God who desperately loves His creation so much that He would continually pursue us over and over and over again. I can't think of a better thing for us to live our life for than for that, and I hope that God is worshiped in the way that we act. Thank you so much for this time together. Until we can meet again, God bless.